Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Mastuma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om, may that one protect us both together. May that one nourish us both together. May we work conjointly together, that is, with great energy. May our study also be vigorous and effective. May we not mutually and unnecessarily dispute or disagree with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So our subject today is the power of the divine name. We can begin this understanding of the power of the divine name by looking at Raja Yoga. Raja Yoga is as a book written by Swami Vivekananda, in fact dictated by him to S.E. Waldo in 1895. When he dictated his book, he had the ancient commentators in mind. And of course, it's a commentary on Patanjali Yoga Sutras in 4 chapters. The 4th chapter is, interestingly enough, called or concerned with freedom. Who doesn't want to be free? Our central goal really is freedom. And we don't need any reminder about it, because if you ask anybody what their key desire will be, it amounts to that. No animal wants to be trapped. No person wants to feel restricted. And this comes out and gets manifested in many, many different social ways. We want freedom of gender, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom connected with rights. So freedom, it seems to me, is our natural goal. And so the 4th chapter of these Patanjali Yoga Sutras is to do with the subject as an end. But then, what are the means? And so we take for granted that we have suitable equipment. A person has a body, sometimes healthy, sometimes not, with various complications and appetites, and a jumping mind that is unreliable and that tends to be occupied in hating others, fighting with others, jealousy, and all these kinds of things. In short, a stupid behavior, waste of energy. But that's really not the purpose of our equipment. The purpose of our equipment is freedom, even though we may not know it at the time. And we use it in many different ways, but we have very suitable equipment. The body is strong. The marvel of the human body is not in the unhealthy body, it's in the healthy body. One small drop of fluid in the eye contains Lysol, an antibacterial capable of being effective when diluted in a 20-liter bucket of water. You know, they use the Lysol in disinfectant in floors in hospitals and things. Supposing something gets past that, then you have all these cilia that throw off any rubbish and deposit it in the mucus lining. We can get rid of it through coughing and sneezing. And if it gets further, it gets into the stomach where hydrochloric acid sits. And even if it gets even further than that, into the bloodstream, we have millions and millions, billions of antibodies capable of surrounding this and dealing with it. Those people who are taking the vaccination, for example, with the COVID virus, the vaccine's job is to make the system immune, to encourage the antibodies to do their job. So with all of that, how can we fall sick is a good question. It is well known that those who have a very strong immune system will be much more competent to fight the COVID virus. So we have suitable equipment, and that equipment is destined for us to attain our freedom. And then another piece of suitable equipment will be the internal instrument, the mind itself. It has a capacity within that to take something called attention and steer it wherever we choose, in whatever direction we want. It's something like a spotlight. When we make it a light on a certain subject, it illuminates it and reveals the truth about it. So all that equipment is necessary, and Raja Yoga, or Patanjali Yoga Sutras, gives us a system, a way in which we can attain our freedom. We can do it progressively, not all in one jump, something within everybody's grasp. But you see, we can pick and choose and select the method and the tools that we want. We have something like a toolbox within us, an A to Z. And within that A to Z, we don't have to use all the tools. The advantage of the Vedanta is to give us sufficient tools to deal with things in situ. Whatever obstacle comes along, we can use it. Supposing we have a car and it breaks down, we don't take the entire toolbox out and work through it A to Z. We pick up what is the most suitable thing and we apply it. Maybe it's a spanner. But is there some all-purpose spanner that we can use? The Raja Yoga system is a dualistic system. But then there's another system, Jnana Yoga, that emphasizes our unity. But we start off from where we stand or where we sit. We start off with our own set of problems and difficulties, but we are well equipped to deal with them. It's not that we want to achieve or attain something, not even in terms of achieving or attaining freedom. We already have it. That's the point. And if we already have it, we have to then find out what is stopping us, what is preventing us from discovering it and expressing it. It's like an animal gets caught in a trap, and it comes through, gets into a certain entrance, but doesn't know how to get out. But it can get out in the same way it came in. The same entrance it can use as an exit, but it doesn't realize it. So that is where we are caught. We are caught in that same dilemma. And when this book was being written, or when it was being dictated as a handbook, practical handbook, to solve all our difficulties and problems, and to apply many, many different tools, each one at a time, each one suitable for our own needs and use. Scripture being a kind of handbook, a kind of manual to do it, and with a guide, a teacher of some kind, a competent teacher to guide you along the way. So with all of that in mind, when he was dictating this book, Darwin's theory of evolution was popular. And Darwin's theory of evolution is to do with two things that he discovered: survival of the fittest and sex selection. That is, survival of the fittest. Any dog that is a super dog, superior in physique and aggression, will fight another dog, will get its food, and then mate, and then it will be a superior dog and create a superior species. That was the idea prevalent in those days. But does it apply to man? You see, if it applied to man, here's the flaw. That we have the capability of controlling these things. We have the capacity to assess nature, understand it properly, and use it as we want. In nature, we have a gravitational force, and it can be in our favor if we want to lower a bucket of water into a well. But when we pull it up, we have to resist nature. We have to know when to go along with nature and when to resist it. We can't just go according to these two principles of survival and sex selection. Otherwise, you see what would happen. On the honeymoon night, two people suitable for mating will go into their private quarters, look at each other with aggression, and lunge toward each other, fight and bite and scratch and tussle and create a super child by the morning. But that's not how we work. That's not how we operate. So we have the capacity really to transcend these things. We don't need to quarrel. And yet, if we remain on this level, as many people do, we find justification for wars, justification for oppressing people. We are no better, therefore, than animals. And all the wars that we find today, and all the difficulties that we find today that result in human suffering, is it any better? In fact, it's worse. I never saw an army of elephants on one side of a river and another army of elephants on the other side raising flags and charging each other. Only man does that. Only these days is more sophisticated. Missiles are thrown at a distance. So if we think we are sophisticated, it's only because we are following these two directives and not making any effort to transcend them. And so the yoga system is much better. We apply the yoga system, no need for that, because there's a certain evolutionary principle which is much better than Darwin's evolutionary principle of these two things that may apply to other species, but really doesn't apply to man. And in a sense, doesn't apply to other species either, if we take evolution as an unfolding process, something that has a potential in it. This potential we call something that is coiled up, Kundalini. If we take examples such as Buddha and Jesus, they never wanted food or shelter. If there was a vacant garden, they'd sit there, sleep there perhaps, get food from somewhere, and wander off. Jesus and Buddha were like that. And they never married. Some people become eunuchs for one reason or another, and some become eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven, says Jesus. Very clearly, there's a choice about controlling these two genetic directives and overriding them. So what is evolution in that sense? Evolution will be an outgrowing of a certain species. We find this, of course, in the second chapter of the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, the 13th stanza, Sati Mula Tad Vipakaha Jati Aya Bhogaha, the root being there, the mula, the root being there, the fruition comes in the form of species, life, and experience of pleasure and pain. What is the root? Is a causal root that makes an individuality. Supposing I have a friend, a goat, and we sit side by side as a tame thing, and since I'm fond of bananas, and the goat is also fond of bananas, we'll eat bananas together. Perhaps I won't eat the skin, perhaps the goat will eat it, never mind. Even if I eat the skin, horns will not grow on my head. And the goat will not give lectures. Because there's something fundamentally different that distinguishes us as a species. It's a root, called a root, that results in species and operates on a causal law. What is a causal law? The causal law is something like a fluid progression. And if we compare it to water, water wants to find an easy route. You can't easily block water, it'll find a way around. Ask any person who has a plumbing crisis. So how will we localize the water, keep it in a certain confined area? We have to put a specific barrier there or a dam there. But sooner or later it'll accumulate and we have to release it. One way or another, the fluidity of water will find its way. And in finding its way, it'll find its expression. And according to its localized accumulations, it'll express its individuality or speciation. That form of evolution seems to be a much better solution to the difficulties than struggle and survival, biting, fighting, scratching, and aggressive mating. Of course, the evolutionary theory has changed in some of those details, but natural selection is still retained. So the yogic form of evolution is extremely different. It says, your freedom is already there. Your perfection is already there. Your totality is already there. O totality, come forth. Let me remove this obstacle. Let me remove that obstacle. And in removing this obstacle and that obstacle, the flow comes through and has a transforming effect. So God's creative power is inside us. That's the point. There's nothing random about it. And with God's creative will and creative power inside us, it forms something like a magnetic field. The root within us forms a pulling, sucking, transforming power. And the sap of the whole universe is God's will, God's creative power. If we want to find out what is reincarnation, we can see all the cells are reincarnated. Between the event of birth and death, reincarnated cells all the time happening. How is it possible? Because that same entity, that creative power, is inside the cells and is inside all of these living entities, expressing themselves in different behaviors according to local causation. Cause and effect, two sides of the same coin. Like a wave, the cause of a crest of a wave is its hollow, and the cause of the next hollow is the crest of the wave, and so it goes on. Well, when I understand things from beyond a dualistic perspective, in other words, bring out another tool, what will we find? We will find it's the same ocean. What looks like a wave is not something individual. And all of this mind, along with the ego that presents itself with pride and capacity to combat other waves, is all just the misunderstanding of the sum totality of everything, the inherent freedom that is already there. So what will we do about it? How will we structure our way of thinking? And what is thought to do with it? Is because this creative will is an original thinking process. This original creative will sets up a magnetic field. It is a suction. It has a pulling power. And so, what is nature? Nature is some kind of convenient arrangement for us of whatever thought you put in. Whatever thought you put in, as a will, as a plan, as a thought, as a resolve, as a determination, as an affirmation, as a hope, as a confidence, will be something like a mold. Where you pour some molten metal in it, you remove the mold and a statue sits there. The mold is your thought. And so, the ancient people understood the structure, and this arrangement has a 24-fold structure. And we can go through all of these structures, ending up in the familiar world that we have, but at the top of it, the creative force itself, the cosmic creative force, is unfolding and unfolding in 24 different ways. So don't ask me how my health is, or will I be healthy, or will you be healthy? Health is a suction. If you want to be healthy, change the suction. Change your thinking. There are many people, particularly now, with lockdown and so on and so forth, who seem to understand the principles of the Vedanta philosophy and so on. And yet, from a practical point of view, still seem to be stressed and suffering. It's because they're not understanding this principle that thought is a suction. It doesn't matter what you think. If your emotions are sucking in negativity, a negative world will be there. Despite all the principles that we're learning, if people are not taking it seriously and practicing, then what will happen? Doubt will arise, fear will arise. All these things will be sucked in creating for yourself a fearful world, an uncertain world, a doubting world, a tempting world, a shaky world. It's not in the principles. It's in understanding the principles at a fundamental level and making sure that our thought is corrected minute by minute, second by second. But we think in words. Words and concepts are two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. And so there's a certain power that is there in a name. There's a funny story told by a prominent senior monk, Swami Purnananda, who was vice president of the Ramakrishna order at some point in time. He had a great experience in Europe and America. And he tells a story about a man who drags another man to court. And the judge says, "What is the problem?" He said, "This man called me a rhinoceros." Well, when was this? It was 2 years back. 2 years back, why you want to bring it now? He says, "Because yesterday I saw the animal. Before that, I had no idea what a rhinoceros was." So every name would have to have a meaning. And it is the same with thought. You can't have a word without the meaning. So in the science of mantra, that is, in the tantric science, variously called Shabda Brahman, or the science of nada, the science of sound, science of vibration, repeating a mantra, repeating a movement, a mental movement that has deep spiritual significance, is the highest thought, therefore the highest suction you can bring in. When we call somebody by name, we immediately catch their attention. This is the power just of a name. And so what is the highest word that we can use, or sound that we can use? Of course, it is Om. It is told that in the course of his wanderings all over India, Swami Vivekananda one day sat under an oak tree near Almora. That's in the Himalayas. He soon became absorbed in deep contemplation, and after the meditation was over, he told Swami Akhandananda, who was accompanying him, brother monk, "Well, here under this banyan tree, one of the greatest problems of my life has been solved." What is that? The brief note of this experience, as he then recorded in his diary, is like this. He says, "In the beginning was the word, etc. The microcosm and the macrocosm are built on the same plan. Just as the individual soul is encased in the living body, so in the universal soul, in the living Prakriti, the objective universe." So let us just think about that. See, we tend to make a universe around our own egocentric position, body, mind, etc., and circumstances and relationships around that. If somebody insults us, we take it to heart. Or something impacts on our immediate family, we take it to heart. Something happening in Yemen or Africa is none of our business, because we don't see this vast totality, this connectedness everywhere. We don't have a holistic attitude and understanding. But science knows it. One of the great principles of science is to extrapolate what you have here to the whole universe. So Isaac Newton did it. Isaac Newton wanted to know from Galileo's principles, is it true? Is it true that an object falling will, if it's in a vacuum, will two objects of the same mass will fall at the same rate and land at the same time? You take a feather and a weight, they'll land at different times. Why? Nothing to do with the force of gravity. It's to do with the motion of the air. The feather will be taken here and there by the air. But in a vacuum, they'll land exactly the same time. You can demonstrate that where there's no gravitational effects, or very little, by standing on the moon. And I think that was done. Two things, two objects held, release them, both fall together. The force of gravitation is constant. Now, Newton, understanding and observing on the grounds of what Galileo had discovered also, he then extrapolates it. His whole equation, he extrapolates it. This is why the moon is going around the earth. This is why the whole thing is going around the sun. This is why the sun is going around the galaxy. So this Newtonian dynamics we can apply reliably everywhere, more or less. There are challenges to today in terms of galaxies, where maybe a modified Newtonian dynamics can be applied to explain a number of things. Differences in velocities, for example, between the inner core of the galaxy and the outer perimeter. We would expect certain velocities, and we don't find them. They're not as we would predict. So, in this same way, the ancient people, and Swami Vivekananda gets this understanding that what happens on the smallest of scales happens everywhere. There must be an axiom that says that the law of nature is constant everywhere we find it. And we find that many of problems today may well be solved by applying this extrapolation principle. Now he says, in the beginning was the Word. This is a beautiful statement because he's quoting from John's Gospel, Christian Gospel. In the beginning was the Word. This whole idea of logos is there. It's not an original idea, it's an old idea. In East and West, it's there. And discovering this is something like a sfoto. That is a technical, linguistic, grammatical term, Indian term that is used, and it means that word and concept is something that is a projection that comes together. So he says, in the beginning was the Word, and the microcosm and the macrocosm, the small thing that happens on your scale. Go even lower, go even smaller, to what is called Planck scale. Smallest possible thing you can imagine. Can't even hardly imagine it anyhow. And see that on that level, it has to be the same everywhere. One of the greatest mysteries today in science is how we can reconcile the microcosm with the macrocosm, the quantum level with general relativity. And desperately people are searching for a way out. But here's a way out. Here's a way out. The same thing occurs everywhere. They are built on the same plan, says Swami Vivekananda. Just as the individual soul is encased in the living body, so is the universal soul in the living prakriti, that rough thing that we call nature. And it's a living thing. It is not just an insentient thing. What makes it a living thing? Because in theological speak, or theistic speak, I should say, it's God's body. If we really understood that it's God's body and all the principles that the prayers tell us, O Mother River, O Mother Earth, etc., O Sky, seeing the divinity and spirituality in everything, seeing the Ruach, the spirit that breathes over the waters, so to speak, cosmic waters. If we truly believed that, we would not pollute these rivers. We would not pollute the sky. We would not dig into the bowels of the earth for selfish gain. We would have some due respect. We would not just throw rubbish anywhere with gay abandon, thinking it's okay, never mind. In remote islands in the Pacific, accumulations of plastic, netting, bottles, all kinds of things, polluting pristine beaches, and animals eating these things. These things break down to small microtubules of plastic. If we really understood this principle, this totality principle, we would certainly not do all these things. We would go along with our prayers in a literal and understanding way, in a feeling way. So this is a living nature, the objective universe. This is not the nature that we find through biting, fighting, scratching, This is not Darwin's nature. And so, at the very end of this Kaivalya chapter, this chapter on isolation and freedom, Swami Vivekananda, and I've said it before, gives a beautiful, beautiful commentary. He says, nature's task is done. This unselfish task, not selfishly trying to get the upper hand, unselfish task, which our sweet nurse, not our hostile environment, our sweet nurse, nature had imposed upon herself. There's only one nature. You know, today people say, oh, nature this and nature that, thinking that they're not included in it. You're also included in it. She gently took the self-forgetting soul by the hand, as it were, and showed him all the experiences in the universe, all manifestations, bringing him higher and higher through various bodies, till his lost glory came back and he remembered his own nature. What a beautiful description. How very different from this physicality of the evolutionary theory that has these two components of struggle, survival of the fittest, and sex selection. Combating nature, overcoming nature, combating others in a self-interest, with a sense of desperation. None of that is here. Of course, Darwin lived in Victorian times where that was a common idea, that nature was raw and rough and ready. But these ancient people understood it differently. It is a living entity, a living nature, a pulsing, living nature. I remember I said at one university, and we were involved in a discussion with an atheist, and I said, yeah, every atom is looking for its own freedom. Of course, I was quoting Swami Vivekananda. One of the students said, what? How can that be? Are you really saying that every atom is literally looking for its own freedom? I said, yes. But the difference between you and me is I'm thinking the whole universe is sentient. And there's every evidence that it is so. And you're thinking it's insentient. You're thinking it just happens to be like that. And if we think that this earth is insentient, then we can poke it, we can pollute it, we can do whatever we like with it. See, it's on the grounds of secular materialism that this pollution, this lack of environmental care has occurred. Not understanding our sweet nature, our mother. So, it says, till lost glory came back and he remembered his own nature. This remembrance is the purpose and thrust of our existence and our effort. Then the kind mother, not the cruel, biting, fighting, scratching nature, the kind mother went back the same way she came for others who also have lost their way in the trackless desert of life. And thus is she working, without beginning and without end. And thus, through pleasure and pain, the great, great dimensions of our lesson, going toward one, away from the other, constantly, not learning the lesson necessarily, through good and evil, the infinite river of souls, good and evil both being necessary, the great river, an infinite river of souls, is flowing into the ocean of perfection, of self-realization. What a beautiful description of the evolutionary process, behind which is the creative will urging forward, and naturally uncovering, bit by bit, every species that has gotten there by means of a root, a cause and effect, a causal root supplied by nature itself. And thus through pleasure and pain, and glory unto those who have realized their own nature. And then he ends with a small prayer, may their blessings be on us all. But what is this nature comprised of? It's comprised of these 24 principles. We can categorize them in that way. But in terms of divine name, we have to resort really to the tantric system. The tantric system employs the idea that everything is variations of sound or small oscillations, some of them detected by the ear. Those we detect by the ear are suitable for the ear, and those undetected by the ear are not suitable for the ear, the instrumentation, and some are not suitable for any experience externally at all, because they're simply the external manifestation of something much more subtle. So, if we start with what is the most subtle and common name or sound for this origin of all the other sounds, it is this sound symbol Om. And we see it described in the Mundaka Upanishad and the Mandukya Upanishad. We find it described as the Mundaka Upanishad saying it is our goal, it is our aim, it is Brahman, such things as this. Then it is seen comprehensively and analyzed and broken down fully in terms of human consciousness in the Mandukya Upanishad of 12 short verses, giving us a comprehensive idea of this. In the beginning was the Word, then says Swami Vivekananda, and he says that is Prakriti is living, it's the objective universe. This covering, he says, of the one soul by the other, this Prakriti, this body, as analogous to the relation between an idea and the word expressing it. They are one and the same, and it is only by mental abstraction that one can distinguish them. Thought is impossible without words. Therefore, in the beginning was the Word, etc. And this dual aspect of the universe, or the universal soul, he says, is eternal. So what we perceive or feel is this combination of the eternally formed and the eternally formless. Very beautiful passage. And years later, of course, Swami Vivekananda would elaborate this in his Bhakti Yoga series. He would say the whole of this universe has, according to Indian philosophy, both name and form, nama and rupa. You see, this world in front of us is a form. It can have a visual form, it can have an audio form, it can have the form of texture and so on, all due to the sense organs, and we register these. And that means that the instruments that are registering them and the objects are really made from the same materials. No difference. But then there's something called memory, there's something called impression, there's something called imagination, and there's something called visualization. Supposing I say to you, please never think of a duck, immediately a picture of a duck will come. It's impossible not to have that image. Because the word and the concept, the image comes straight away. So that subtle form is called nama. And this whole world, therefore, is a combination of this ideation of things, nama, the subtle version of it, and this rupa. Now, is it a fact that nama, being more subtle, will manifest the rupa? And so the ancients will say, yes, that every form has its subtle sound variety. And how do we know this? We know this because the yogis, those who look toward the interior, those who see the progressive unfoldment of the full potential that the tantrics register as kundalini, when that coiled up unfolds, then bit by bit, every level of consciousness reveals itself and has a set vibration that can be with the inner heard. If there's a vibration and we have the capacity to understand it, we should register it. So Om can be heard. And all the other bija mantras, seed mantras, can also be heard. Two forms of mantras are there, Vedic mantras and Tantric mantras. The tantric mantras contain a bija, a seed form. So, in Bhakti Yoga, he says the whole of this universe has, according to Indian philosophy, these two aspects, and in the human microcosm, there cannot be a single wave in the mind stuff. Don't forget, according to the yogis, there is a certain localized captivation of universal consciousness, and that comes out as what we call chitta, something like a mass, something like a lake. And vrittis are there. Now, modern investigations into neurology will echo this. Baroness Susan Greenfield is a well-renowned neurologist trying to explore the length and breadth of consciousness as contained in the brain. Says it's not possible, we can't define consciousness, and we can never see where it arises, but we can think of it like a lake. And something is inserted into the lake. And depending on the velocity with which you throw it and the size of the object, that is the mass of the object, depending on that, that will create different ripples. But every ripple will find its way to the end. Every ripple, every thought that you make finds itself infinitely echoed because it all comes from one principle, this cosmic creative mind. This logos, this word. And so, this single wave in the minds of chitta vritti, unconditioned by name and form, if it be true that nature is built throughout on the same plan, if it's true, we think it's true, we know it's true. Isaac Newton found it to be true. Einstein applied his principles in a general way. He took thought experiments and applied them universally, and only now we're finding validation of these principles. So this kind of conditioning by name and form must also be the plan of the building of the whole of the cosmos. This name is there. Now, how do we make a theory of everything? You do it on these principles. That if there's a small vibration, let us say in a quantum field, some small energy that we can't detect except by its effect, and it comes and it goes and it annihilates very quickly. Supposing we extrapolate that and say there's a form coming out from it, that the name manifests as a form. Then those forms that we register comes out in general principles. Now we've made a reconciliation between the two sets of physics, the two great physics theories. Then he says, as one lump of clay being known, all things of clay are known. So the knowledge of the microcosm must lead to the knowledge of the macrocosm. That is why the ancients investigated, what is this thing? What am I? Who am I? By investigating on the criteria of permanence, is the body me? Is the eyeball me? Are the objects that I see, are they correlated? And how will I observe the eyeball? If it's fresh or scratchy or itchy one day or tired the next, some entity must be looking at it. What is it? Is it the mind? But the mind I can also watch. All the things going through it, all the things coming and leaving like trains in a station, coming and going, all events coming, having their appearance, having a cup of tea, going off, changing things. What about the decision-making capacity that we have? What about the executive officer that sits behind the discerning entity, the evaluating, the analyzing, the willing side? That also changes and vacillates. So what is the ultimate observer? And when we find it, we can see, if I discover that having no properties, then I have discovered that same principle everywhere in the whole universe. I've just gone from dualism to this non-dualistic principle. So he says, now the form in the outer crust of which the name or the idea is the inner essence or kernel. The body is the form, and the mind or the antakarana, the internal instrument, is the name. And sound symbols are universally associated with the name, nama. In all beings, this is so, having the power of speech, or at least expression. In the individual man, the thought waves rising in the limited mahat, that is the great cosmic mind, or the chitta, the mind stuff, must manifest themselves first as words, that is, as ideas, and then as the more concrete forms. In the universe, Brahma, the creator, or that golden womb of all beings, Hiranyagarbha, this Mahat, this great principle, this cosmic word, first manifested himself as name and then as form, that is, as this universe. We are very clear, therefore, about how this universe came to be. All this expressed sensible universe is the form behind which stands the eternal, inexpressible Svota, the manifester as logos or word. This eternal Svota, the essential eternal material of all ideas or names, is the power through which the Lord creates the universe. Nay, the Lord first becomes conditioned as the Svota. See, in other words, the divine spirit expresses itself through the divine idea, and the divine idea through the divine sound or word. The concept, the fundamental to a proper understanding of the power of the divine nature. Then this logos and nada Brahman that we are describing is common across all cultures, across all things. We find it in John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Word. And this wasn't a new idea. We find the concept of logos widely prevalent in ancient times. We find it in the times of Heraclitus amongst the Greeks. And we find some principle regulating a cosmic flux or change. And then we find it also in Judaism. So the Stoics also, they had a theistic connotation. They identified the logos with a personal aspect of it. And also maybe a more pantheistic concept of God, an understanding that this whole universe is the physical God. And you find today people still have that kind of philosophy. So the concept of logos in India really began with this concept of Svota and developed from there. Nada Brahman, as we call it, is not really a theoretical concept. It is the subject to our experience, the anahata dhvani, the subtle sound vibration that originates as Nada Brahman or cosmic mind and falls back into it like a flow of water in a fountain. So we can see that this shabda, this sound and word, comes in three varieties. The gross sound, we call that vaikari. And then madhyama, the sound of thought. And then pashanti, the sound, that is the sound of the initial movement, this shabda brahman. So every mantra actually has an inherent power, what we call mantra chaitanya. It has a certain specific power and it becomes a living thing. But how to discover this power? We have to realize it. It is realized by those who practice spiritual disciplines systematically and lead pure lives. This is what I call making friends with your mantra. It is very necessary to do that. If you got a mantra from a teacher, let me try to explain. Don't forget, the mantra is used continuously. So, Mother Sharada Devi said to one of her intimate disciples, she told him that or she was asked, Mother, how can I realize God? She was asked this question. How can I have unfoldment? See the language being used, the language of Kundalini. How can I get this unfoldment? How can I get this evolution? How can I make a catalyst for it? You see, what's happened is, instead of waiting for another 1,000 million years to develop wings with the desire to fly, with a man's brain capacity, he invents an aircraft and he can do it. So man can transcend the evolutionary process by his ingenuity. So can we also transcend everything and unfold and discover our own godly nature? So the Holy Mother suggested a simple method. She said, Japat Siddhi, Japat Siddhi, Japat Siddhi, repeatedly. Through performing japa alone, one can attain realization. A remarkable statement. Now, what is this japa sadhana? It is just the methodical repetition of a sacred formula, a name, a Sita japa mantra that we get from our guru, spiritual master. We should remember that when we receive a mantra, we receive it from a competent spiritual master who has a connection, and the power of the mantra comes through that. And if we read any book on Tantra Sadhana, the science of this, we will find reference to a number of mantras, but if we just take any mantra and start doing japa, it will not produce any effect. These are all the books. This statement is made in all the books. So what is necessary is that we should come through a guru parampara. Today, there's a great misunderstanding about gurus. I was even asked, can I change my mantra? You mean it's equivalent to changing your guru, because the mantra has come through and the teachers come through a certain lineage, guru parampara, a successive generation of teachers and disciples, and the power goes through that, and the power goes through the mantra also. So we have to learn it from a guru. Power is transmitted from master through the mantra to the disciple. And this disciple, again, when he becomes Siddha, a perfected soul, he or she in turn transmits the mantra along with the power. So we must have faith in this transmission. Very important. And we have to have faith in the mantra, understanding that it is the most powerful tool in your toolbox. The most powerful tool in your toolbox, because it has within it a power. And it is just it is not a special mantra with any potency to do with the words, because all the mantras are known. There are no tantric mantras that are unknown. But the selection of it and the transference of it is where the power is. So therefore, this power in this divine word is there to be used as a tool, effective tool. And I repeat something here that the mother said was, through this alone, through japa sadhana alone, you can unfold the very highest and assert your freedom. Only when we receive a mantra with such faith will it become effective. And only then are we able to reach the goal through this way, provided we follow the path that is prescribed by this teacher. And I think because spiritual progress is an unfoldment, it requires updating. It requires being in connection with that guru, with that teacher. There are many, many people who get this mantra diksha, and that's the last they ever see of the guru. And they think that that's effective. But of course, honoring the guru is also necessary. And then understanding the potency that comes through that. So this is the power of this divine word and the reasoning behind it. And Japa Sadhana lays emphasis on taking the help of these sound symbols. And what is the science behind it? I'll repeat. You see these 24, the structure of 24 principles, I tend to labor because it is a means of going back to this creative will, which acts like a suction. And when we fill the mind with purity of thought and intention, by repeating the word, by repeating the concept, we are creating the form. Because the concept, the highest form, the subtle sounds, comes from the subtle elements and originates in the cosmic mind, the Nada Brahman. So that any thought comes from there and irresistibly will manifest itself through the other cosmic principles and materialize as the concrete world in front of you. In that sense, all this world is thought, manifested and created by a supreme thinker. And every time we mobilize our local branch office, we are tapping into that cosmic mind and creating a creative flow. We are creating our own world in front of us, in front of our very eyes, we're doing it. So we have to be extremely careful about how we think. And the best way to saturate the mind with truth and beauty and goodness and love and harmony is to repeat these very words and to understand them in the context of japa sadhana as well. Lovingly repeating this name is extremely effective, but we have to do it with meaning. And so Patanjali, in his Patanjali Yoga Sutras, puts this Om, for example, as the name of Ishvara. But he says that you have to repeat it and reflect, contemplate on its meaning. That's the point. Otherwise, what is the point? I often give an exercise to people, give a sound, get people to sit quietly, and then I tell them, please repeat this mantra, and I give them some commercial sound. I won't do it because of advertising rights. And they think, at the beginning, they think, oh, this is a very special mantra, but they realize it's the name of a commercial product. And there was an experiment done, repeating this sound, and it was told it doesn't matter what sound you say. You can repeat any old monotonous sound. And this comes from a misunderstanding that the mind has to be dulled. The mind has to go into a state of turbidity, a dullness. Not at all. It has to be filled with joy and glory. It has to be filled with God. And to fill the mind with God, we fill it with God's name. And this is the beauty of this japa sadhana, this glory of the name. Every thought is a name. And we don't think in syntax and commas and full stops and capital letters and proper grammar and so on and so forth. We think in single words. You'll see in the guided meditation, I tell, instead of saying long sentences, I say, let us bless with these highest virtues and qualities strong. Repeat, strong, true, wise, full, free, truth, beauty, goodness, love, harmony. When people are in trouble, and I get them to sew a cloth, and I get them to sew the names. I give them a mantra to put in the center, and then I get them to sew names around it. Apart from God, home, and country, I get them to sew strength, truth, love, goodness, harmony, like that. Every time you make a stitch, you're creating a thought. And every thought is manifesting that equivalent in this world, because thought is a suction. Thought is a suction and a means of condensing the thought into this world of ours. We have to be skilled at understanding at any given time what is going through the mental field. And having understood it, We have to replace it with something better. But instead of doing that and waiting for something negative to come, don't remain idle. You fill the mind with all the positive things, because if you leave the mind idle, then the thoughts from the deepest psychological level, mostly negative, your bank balance mostly being in the red, not in the black, will come up with, poor me, what a pity, and levels of criticism, and levels of anger and jealousy and hatred and pride, and recalling something somebody did 100 years ago, and so on and so forth. All of those things. The forgive and forget. Well, they say it's easy to forget, but it's not easy to. It's easy to forgive, but it's not easy to forget. Well, then, if you didn't forget, you never forgave either. So we have this regurgitation, chewing the cud of resentment coming up. And what are we doing? We're poisoning our immediate environment, namely this creative will that is manifesting in every cell of the body and manifesting in every single vibration that we call the universe, and condensing in such a way suitable to be picked up by the eyes and the ears and the touch and the taste and all the senses. So this is the understanding. Every form, every sound is divine. There is no sound, no form that is not divine. And what happens on the microcosm happens on the macrocosm. What we call a universe is nothing more than God's body. And what we see as fragments and dividedness in the universe is nothing but fragmented God, seemingly. Fragmented through the mind, like looking at something through a kaleidoscope and splitting the light. So we have to learn through practice, through repetition, cultivating love, cultivating goodness, cultivating all these virtues. And if we look at the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, there are whole lists of over 20 and more virtues that can be cultivated. At least we can cultivate a few of them and saturate the mind with goodness and create our own good environment. Rather than complaining about it, let us transform it. Man is a transformer in the capacity of transforming, translating all the various vicissitudes, so-called vicissitudes and obstacles and difficulties in life into something good. Something like what a rose flower does. You put it in manure, in stuff that you wouldn't necessarily eat and you don't necessarily like the smell of. And from it, it produces a beautiful rose flower. Man has the capacity for transforming harmony from discord, using the power of words and creating forms as a result. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.